Please take your seats. The program is about to begin.
And here's the twist.
Put your hands together for senior economics reporter Courtney Brown.
Good morning. Thank you so much for spending your morning having a coffee with us. This is going to be a very exciting conversation about housing. Let's just put something out there right now. I'm an economics reporter. I write Axios macro. I've always been super passionate about housing, but I'm trying to buy a house right now. So if you notice that I'm particularly passionate, that is why. As you all know, we're going to be talking about what it will take to build more homes, improve affordability, and create a housing market that works for more Americans. Quick shout out to our sponsor, Citi, this morning. Thank you so much, Citi, for making this possible. Before we get started, quick plug. I told you about my newsletter, Axios Macro, comes out at noon. I'm gonna head out and start working on it after we finish up here. You can sign up at axios.com/newsletters. You can learn more about our events at axios.com/events. All right, let's get to the topic at hand. We have a very exciting guest to start the morning, Colorado Representative Brittany Pettersen. Let's welcome her to the stage. Thank you so much, Congresswoman, for joining us today. Here's what I want to start. You and I have something in common. We are both millennials. And I learned last night that about 15% of your colleagues in the House are millennials, 15 or 16%.
I'm surprised it's that high.
Yeah, I learned that as well. I was also surprised. This is a generation whose formative economic experiences include two important things, right? There's the Great Recession. We lived through years of historically low home building activity, rapidly rising home prices, and as a result, our generation is really the first where home ownership has become way less attainable than it was for our parents. So I just want to start there. I mean, how does the fact that millennials are starting to, make policy, how does that affect the way they think about housing, whether you're a Democrat or a Republican?
I think you hit it on the nail, and it's great to be with everybody this morning. This conversation couldn't be more important right now. It's the number one pain point that people are feeling across the country, and especially in my district and in our rural communities. When I think about the younger generation, where being able to afford a home and even being able to dream about owning your own home, it seems completely out of reach. You hit it with the mortgage crisis that we face and the recession. Home builders went out of business at a high rate then. We never caught up to the housing supply. And we haven't made federal investments for 30 years. And most of those properties where we did make those federal investments are coming up for sale right now. So people are being squeezed at every level, and this is the number one pain point. For millennials and the people even younger that are coming up, it is something where they don't think that they're ever going to own a home, and that is also really challenging when you think about it. It's foundational to the American dream. It's being bought into our economy, and that economic security and being able to have generational wealth. It's been so critical in all of those ways. So I've been up since 2 because I have a 1-year-old. Who woke me up. So if there's anything I missed for your question, please repeat.
You nailed it. Let's talk about 21st Century Road, which became law less than a week ago. It's a pretty remarkable moment for home housing legislation. If we have this conversation, I don't know, 3 years from now, 5 years from now, how will we know that this legislation worked? What will we see?
That's a good question, because oftentimes people are saying, what immediately is going to hit your constituents? And unfortunately, with some of these urgent issues in our country that we're facing, these problems were created over decades, and it is going to take an all hands on deck approach now and 10 years from now. So it's not going to immediately be felt. There are some things that will help reduce costs, and we can talk about that. But after 5 years, I think that the piece that I'm the most excited about I should be touting my bills that are in it, but and I'm excited to have those included. But the piece that I think will make such a big difference on our housing supply is limiting the supply being bought up by private equity, and what we were seeing with our starter homes. And unfortunately, limiting that is going to really help us in the long term. And I think that what we're doing to streamline some of the regulations at the local level, build up and pilot some of the HUD programs that we can expand on, increasing access to mortgages for modular homes, just some of the opportunities that we're going to create over the long term. I think that we'll know if it's working when people start to feel like this is within reach again, that they're not spending 50% of their paycheck to put a roof over their head. In Colorado, we had rent increase 80% in just a short period of time. And so we have a lot of work to do. My worry, and you all probably share this, is in Congress, and I saw this in the legislature, you do a big thing, and it takes ongoing effort. And I worry that a lot of people will say, well, we already did that housing bill. And quite frankly, I can't believe that it was the biggest thing that we've done in 30 years. I'm proud that we got it done, but we deserve so much more attention on this issue.
So you're worried that maybe the momentum won't keep going?
We need to make sure it does. This is not solving all the problems. Like any bill, there are many pieces that are lacking, and I think especially that federal investment that we need to help increase the housing supply. It also doesn't address the workforce shortage that construction companies are facing in being able to hire people and deporting many of the people that they rely on, as well as the tariffs that are increasing costs. So there's plenty of cascading impacts here that are not addressed in this bill.
Those seem like more fraught issues that might not generate as much bipartisan support as we saw with 21st Century Road. So do you feel that the legislation really addressed only the things with respect to housing that could garner bipartisan support, whereas the issues that you're talking about, which are important to housing, right? You can't build a house if there's no one to build them. Does that kind of get left to the side in the future?
Yeah, when I was in the state legislature in split chambers, it was always, seeing what you were able to get done and trying to find that common ground. So I think this is a beacon of hope that Congress can do that once in a while still. I think we all need that right now. No thanks to the president, though.
Let's talk about your district in Colorado. I was reading about it, and it seems like it captures two very different housing crises. Jefferson County, I believe, there's a lot of talk about the missing middle. There are people who make too much to qualify for affordable housing, but they don't make enough to afford a home. And then there's the mountain area where there are workers who can't afford to live where they work. So do you think there's a one-size-fits-all solution to those problems, or do you think about attacking those problems with a different strategy?
Well, I think when you look at the housing crisis, it couldn't highlight the economic opportunity gap that we're facing right now. And in our mountain communities, we have people that have homes that sit vacant year-round, that enormous homes that families come to use maybe 2 weeks out of the year, and then they sit vacant. And then you have people that can't afford to live there, who are teachers, who are firefighters, our small businesses who are unable to hire a workforce there. So you just see this growing gap, wealth gap, and people that have 5, 6 homes, and then you have so many people being left behind that can't even afford rent. So I think that our mountain communities are feeling this much more acutely in Colorado, but it also is hitting our suburban areas as well. For all of you, I'm 44, so I love to scroll and look on Zillow, and I feel like it tells whatever app people use to look at what's going on in the housing market. I think it tells a lot about what's going on in the community, and what I see You have very expensive homes that will go off the market quickly, and then you have, those starter homes that sit there for a very long time, and that's also reflective of the people that can't afford to buy those homes that are more affordable but are still completely unattainable because of the mortgage rate and the cost of home going hand in hand.
Jared on your team reminded me that last year I interviewed one of your colleagues, Senator Tina Smith, and the first question I asked her was, when did you buy a home? And she told me that she bought a home in her late 20s, it was the 1980s. The mortgage rate was 10%, so high.
But the house was still affordable.
Right. And so that's the dynamic that's different here, right? And it's very strange, this market we're living in, where we have high interest rates. I know they're not 10%, but come on, we were living through a period when mortgages were 3%. So even where they are now, about 6%, that feels high. But on the other side, you still have that high home price. So it makes me a little bit cynical, I think, that there is something that Congress can do, because the mortgage rate is such a big part of it. And I mean, what can Congress really do about mortgage rates, right? You can only address really one side of the equation. How do you think about that?
Having an independent Federal Reserve is a key piece over the long term. Thank you. Our financial services nerds out there. But
you don't often get applause for Federal Reserve.
Exactly. So we need to rein in, we need to get inflation under control. That's been impacted by the pandemic. When you think about everything that we've dealt with as a country over, from the time that the mortgage crisis hit until now, and how this has impacted homeownership, we have so much work to do. But the number one issue that we need more federal investment at, and I'm proud of the steps that we've taken, is increasing the supply, because that is the most important thing that we can do to reduce costs. And we have seniors that have no place to move to and to downsize, and we don't have opportunities for young families to move in. So there's, in my county, in Jefferson County, it's the first time that we have more people who are over 60 than under. And so we need to make sure that we're also incentivizing the types of homes that need to be built, and we need to make sure that developers have those financial incentives to do so.
I mentioned at the top that I am currently looking for a home, and one thing I've realized, perhaps I was too naive, is just how local housing is. The issues that I'm dealing with, even in the little neighborhood I'm trying to look in DC, are so different if you talk to someone who's living in Florida or elsewhere. How much of what you're dealing with in your district with respect to housing can be addressed at the federal level, and how much of it is really what you have to do at the local level?
Well, we need to change, we need to bring incentives, and this bill does many of these things, which is, for the first step is identifying the barriers at the local level. So this ensures that local governments actually have to identify and publicly report some of the regulatory framework that they have that gets in the way of a pro-growth, pro-housing agenda, and making sure that we can identify that. That's the first step. Streamlining the regulatory framework, making sure that HUD and the USDA, that they're actually, don't have duplicative requirements. I mean, some of these things seem obvious, but if you don't direct agencies to do this, agencies are going to only do the things that we're directing them to do. So when you think about, what we need to do to make sure that our government actually works for people, that it's not a terrible experience, that developers don't face hurdle after hurdle, this bill does a lot of that.
We started talking about your generation. I'm wondering if we can end there as well. What has to happen before a younger family no longer thinks of housing as the defining economic challenge of their life? Do we ever get to that point?
Well, I think that I hope so. I have two boys. I have a 6-year-old and a 1-year-old. So between Congress and them, no day is ever the same. It's always an adventure.
I can only imagine.
When I think about, the frustration that I feel in Congress right now, when I see day after day being wasted, not being focused on the urgent needs of our country, it is devastating because it has long-term implications. And so I'm proud of these first steps, but this is an all hands on deck moment. This is the most important thing we can do to bring stability for the American people. When we think about not just the housing crisis and the costs that are hitting people there, but that's on top of now what's happening in healthcare and rising costs with inflation at every level. So I think that we can get there. We need to have a more functional government. That's not just about one party or the other. It's people and leadership that care about rolling up their sleeves and doing the work of the American people, the things that might not get you a headline and get you on the news, but are going to change people's lives. And so I look forward to continuing this work because it couldn't be more important.
All right, we'll end on an optimistic note then. Thank you so much, Congresswoman Pettersen, for joining Axios. Appreciate it.
Please give a warm welcome to our View from the Top moderator, Juliana Goldman.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for being here. We're grateful that you are taking time out of your busy days and schedules to be here for this very important conversation. And of course, a huge thank you to our partner this morning, Citi. All that we do here at Axios would not be possible without the support of our partners. And now please join me in welcoming to the stage the Head of Enterprise Services and Public Affairs at Citi, Edward Schuyler. Thank you. Good morning. It's nice to be in a cool room today.
Yeah, I appreciate Axios' investing in air conditioning.
100%. I want to start, Edward, by looking big picture, because across the country, from Wall Street to Main Street to the halls of Congress, the housing affordability is dominating conversations. And it's a topic with which you're very familiar, having served as Deputy Mayor of Operations in New York and now in your role at Citi. Why is this such an urgent crisis? And why is Citi best positioned to lead in helping with solutions?
Well, I think, unfortunately, it's sort of what we learned in high school economics. We have the classic supply and demand problem. And by some estimates, there's a shortage of about 7 million affordable homes for those in lower income that are struggling to achieve them. In some places like New York, where I worked in government, as you said, people are spending sometimes a third of their income on housing. So forget about healthcare, food and other necessities. They're spending a huge amount and struggling to even have the opportunities to pay, find a place that has a rent that they can afford. From my perspective, at Citi, I see the challenge through a couple of lenses. First is overseeing our real estate footprint. We've got about 80,000 employees across the country. And despite what people might assume, the minority of them are in New York. They're in Tampa, they're in Tucson, they're in Jacksonville, they're in St. Louis. And so we hear from them about the challenges they're facing. And then, the second part is the partners we invest with through our foundation and through our impact fund. And we're focused a lot on financial resilience, on social infrastructure. And when we're investing in nonprofits, it's all about asset building and how to help people achieve economic mobility. We had a conference in New York about this very topic with the Center for Future. And so all the needs that we're seeing in the nonprofit sector are also really focused on mobility and affordability. And then the third lens is really our government relations team. And when we're talking with mayors and governors, members of the House and Senate, the issue of affordability and housing in particular, is always comes up. And then I have the privilege of working with our Citi Community Capital team, which is the leader in this space.
And now Citi also recently launched the Blueprint for Housing initiative. Can you tell us more about it?
Sure. So we are very proudly the largest affordable housing financer in the country. We've had that title for the last 16 years. And we did something that we haven't done before in our history, which we actually made a go-forward commitment about $60 billion over the next 5 years to finance 250,000 units. And if you look at our activity last year, which was about 35,000 units and about almost $8 billion, this really represents about a 50% increase over that rate. And then we'll pair that up with investing in nonprofits that are on the front lines of this issue, helping nonprofit developers do things like site diligence, planning, zoning studies so that they can get projects off the ground, and also advocate on policy issues that we think are important.
We talk about, I want to dig deeper into the policy issues, because we recently saw effective work across the aisle and a sign of just how pressing this issue is to pass new federal housing law, the 21st Century Road to Housing Act. But again, you've been on the Hill pushing other legislative measures. What do you want to see next
So what
in
we
the
want,
policy?
so the federal government provides low-income housing tax credits. They've done it over the last 40 years. They've been really, they've catalyzed the construction of about 4 million affordable units over that period, and it's been a very successful program. However, we don't think the federal government's getting their money's worth because the credits aren't transferable, which means that tax credit equity investor, which is generally a bank like Citi or other financial institution, has to receive that tax credit for the next 10 years. And you don't always know what your tax liabilities or challenges are going to be over that time period, so that type of commitment doesn't always make sense. If that tax credit was transferable to other investors or entities, that we believe that would drive more investment into the housing space, and those tax credits would be more attractive. Right now, they're worth about 85 cents on the dollar. And this isn't some type of financial engineering argument. We've seen this work before with the tax credits that funded green energy projects through the Inflation Reduction Act. They're transferable, and they're trading at 95 cents on the dollar. So we think that we could help the federal government stretch these tax dollars further and then catalyze more investment in affordable housing.
Okay, so we've talked about financing, we've talked about policy, and now I'd love to turn to innovation, because we really haven't seen enough of innovation in the housing space, which is critical to solving this crisis.
Right.
Can you talk about why? And
Yeah,
And
I mean, I scratch my head this one. I mean, this is the country that has pioneered tech and AI. There's, what industry has America not led and innovated? This is the reason we're such a source of talent from around the world. Yet in housing, we're sort of just doing stuff we've been doing for years. And so one of the things that we launched a couple years ago was our Citi Impact Fund. And we became the first bank to make a commitment to invest in double bottom line companies using its own capital. So what I mean by that is we allocated $500 million to invest in companies that not only are trying to be commercially viable, but have a social purpose. And that could be in sustainability, that could be in social infrastructure, financial resilience, the future of work. And within that, what we've seen is there are companies that have identified this challenge and are focusing on it, and some have been very successful. One's called Icon, and Icon basically uses AI and 3D printing to construct homes. I believe they have the largest
3D printing.
Literally through, I mean, it's not obviously one of these size but
yeah.
It's that same technology that they apply. They're building homes in Texas. They're working with the Army and doing really exciting things. And the net result is it's cheaper. There's also companies like PadSplit that are trying to take advantage of existing housing stock and make them be used more efficiently. The same way Airbnb works for short-term, do the same for long-term renters. So there are some exciting things happening. So we've decided as part of our Road to Housing initiative, our blueprint. As part of that $60 billion, in addition to the $50 million we're going to invest in nonprofit companies, we're going to allocate additional $25 million in these private sector companies that are trying to solve this issue. And we've seen some green shoots in this area, and we just want to double down with an additional equity investment in these companies.
And that's an announcement you're making here today.
We are making it right here. You're the first to hear about it.
We all are.
Yeah, you
Great.
all are. You and 100 of your closest friends.
And whoever is watching on the live stream. We have time for about one more question. As deputy mayor, you were focused on the micro level in New York, and now at City, you've got a more holistic view, a national, even global level. Are there any trends in the housing affordability area that you're seeing cut across both spaces?
Yeah, I think that, there's always this sort of perception that people in business want to see less regulation, and that they'll always say, well, regulation's gone too far and whatever. But it does appear when you look at different jurisdictions, whether sometimes you're looking at zoning requirements, that there are ways, and the recent act that the Congressman was just speaking about, the Road to Housing Act, did talk about sort of trying to decrease some of the requirements on construction. And when you look, and in New York State, the governor got a good amount of grief for trying to reduce some of the environmental regulation that developers have to follow. But it does seem that if we want to make some progress here, we're going to have, different jurisdictions are going to have to do things as far as expediting permitting, making sure the zoning makes sense, and also making some of the hard decisions that sometimes on the political level on the ground are difficult. There are many spaces, there are many times across the country where there's opportunities to build housing, and that impacts people that already live in that area. And while they may understand the greater social good, it impacts them, it impacts potential traffic, it impacts how many people are going to schools, playing at the parks, and people are generally, naturally sometimes resistant to that. And sometimes we need to, make those hard decisions, for the greater good, and that's what we trust, our elected officials to do.
Well, I think that's a really great note to add on, because unfortunately, Ed, we're out of time. But thank you so much for joining us today. And of course, a special thank you to our partner today, City, for helping make these conversations possible.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Welcoming back, Courtney Brown.
All right, I have another guest for you. He has been a leading voice on bipartisan efforts to address the nation's housing challenges, including policies to increase housing supply, support local communities, expand access to affordable housing. Please join me in welcoming our next guest, Congressman Darin LaHood from Illinois.
Hey, Courtney. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Congressman, for being here. Your district, we were just talking it backstage, your district in central Illinois sits at the intersection of what I think are two huge economic stories right now. The first is the push to rebuild U.S. manufacturing. Your district has Caterpillar, Rivian, other manufacturing companies. And then the other story is the nation's housing shortages. These two stories are connected. Correct?
Yes, they are.
Yeah, so from where you sit, is America's ability to build factories tied to its ability to build homes?
Well, of course it is. And let me thank you for having me today, Courtney, and Axios for putting this on. Great to be with you. My district, the 16th Congressional District of Illinois, which is kind of central Illinois going up to northwest Illinois and kind of the exurbs of Chicago, but heavy manufacturing, heavy agriculture district. Very proud that I have the largest concentration of Caterpillar workers anywhere in the world, about 12,000 Caterpillar workers in and around Peoria, make a lot of heavy equipment, mining equipment. We also have a company called Rivian, which is a very popular EV company based in Bloomington Normal in my district. And
cool cars, very cool cars.
And if you went back 5 years ago, we had 0 employees there. We now have over 8,000 employees there. It's their largest manufacturing facility in the United States. But directly tied to that is we don't have enough housing. Bloomington Normal is a community of about 170,000, but now you have people, those 8,000 workers that are driving 90 miles, maybe 120 miles to get to work. And so 2 years ago, we started on this process on the Ways and Means Committee with how do we help increase housing stock? And it's really a rural, suburban, and urban problem. But Bloomington Normal is kind of emblematic of that. And so we worked on the affordable housing tax credit. We introduced that bill 4 years ago. We had 170 co-sponsors, almost half Republicans, half Democrats, which I think was a reflection of the broad support within the Congress. We didn't get it done the first 2 years, but last year we got it included in the large tax bill in a bipartisan way, and now it's the law of the land.
One of your colleagues from across the aisle, Congressman Pettersen, just got off the stage, and I asked her something I want to ask you with respect to that legislation and 21st Century Road. In 5 years, how will you know these pieces of legislation have worked?
Well, I think it will be reflective in our communities where we don't have enough housing right now. We're already seeing with the affordable housing tax credit, we estimate in Illinois we'll create about 40 to 50,000 new housing units just in 2-year period. That's already started. But that housing stock seeing that in our communities, I think will be a reflection of that. Affordability will be a reflection of that. Young people being able to buy homes is part of that. That's not all tied to the affordable housing tax credit. It's also the 20th century housing bill that just became law too. It's a combination of those, but we still have work to do on refining that and adding to that. Getting the private sector to have more investment in housing is a big part of that.
And how big of a role do you think Washington should play in that point, getting the private sector to invest in housing?
Well, I think the private sector has to be involved in housing. And it's creating that predictability and certainty in the housing market. And that can be done through the tax code, through the regulatory environment, through other policies to put in place to allow the private sector to flourish and grow in this space. I don't think you can rely on the government to do that. And I think that's what we've done in both of these pieces of legislation that I mentioned. But there clearly will be others that we ought to look at.
What is the single most important thing that you believe Road accomplishes, and where do you think it falls short?
On the 21st century?
Yeah, 21st Century Road Housing Act.
Well, it's not perfect, right? It's a bipartisan bill. A lot of give and take went into that. But I think from a positive side, if you look at the reduction of the regulatory barriers that go into construction, I think we reduced some of those barriers and burdens in a positive way. I think also from a financing standpoint, allowing community bankers and other financing institutions to be able to have a more free flow of capital and funding is a big part of that also. I think expanding into rural areas, which is important to my district, and more manufactured housing and expanding those opportunities. I mean, those are all beneficial. Some people said we didn't go far enough in a number of those areas, but it was a compromise because of the nature of getting it through the House and the Senate.
Do you think that there is or will be more momentum to do additional housing legislation down the line?
Well, I think it depends on the success of what we see with what we've done already.
Okay.
I mean, I think we're already seeing it with the affordable housing tax credit. We're seeing real housing developments going in, senior housing, what I call workforce housing. I don't like to use low-income housing tax credit. It's really workforce housing, affordable housing. I think if we build on that success and we see these new housing developments going in and communities being positively affected, I think that's success, but I think that will help build momentum for us doing more things.
Why is this the moment that housing broke through?
Because it's problematic. Again, I go back to rural, suburban, urban problem. It affects every congressional district, every state, and nobody is immune from it. And we've seen that over the last several years here. And it's so helpful to the economic well-being of communities on having that affordable housing. And I think that was, as we talked to members of Congress, I always say all politics is local, and we worked with the stakeholders to get the affordable housing tax credit in the tax bill last year. Having them at a local level talk to their member of Congress about the need for affordable housing and obviously the economic benefits for that and the workforce that benefit from that was in some ways, when that's articulated the right way, an easy sell for our members.
The country suddenly needs more of everything. Homes, factories, now AI, data centers. One story I'm really fascinated in is What happens when those priorities are competing for the same resources, the same land, the same infrastructure, the same power? I mean, are you worried about that struggle playing out in your district and around the country?
Not really. I mean, that's not something that's come up. I think we're focused right now on housing and fulfilling some of the needs that are out there, as I mentioned before. I mean, I think both can exist. Yeah. Obviously, if we want to win the AI race and the quantum race and the high-capacity chip manufacturing race, we're going to have the capability to compute. I mean, I serve on our House Intelligence Committee. This is existential to the future of the United States from a national security standpoint, from an economic standpoint. And so, yes, they both need to exist. And I think we have the ability. It's a large country. There's lots of opportunities. Doesn't mean we're not going to have to work through some of these barriers and boundaries, and clearly we have work to do when it comes to data centers. But yeah, I think we have the ability to take on big problems and challenges.
I want to take the very selfish opportunity to ask you about the economic backdrop in your district, since you come from such a manufacturing-heavy district. When you talk to manufacturers and even other employers back in your district, what is the biggest complaint that you hear from them? Where do they really need help? Where are they struggling?
Well, I would go back a couple years. I think the one thing that the private sector looks at, whether it's manufacturing or other areas of the economy, is they want predictability and certainty. And I think if you go back and you look at the tax bill that we did last year, we predicated that on how do we allow the private sector to flourish? And how do you create that predictability and certainty in the tax code to do that? So making permanent things like the R&D tax credit, which had a lot of bipartisan support, 199A, things like, whether you're an S Corp, a C Corp, or an LLC, small business, medium business, large business, having that predictability and certainty in the tax code. Bonus depreciation, 100% expensing, allowing companies to hire more workers, pay higher wages, invest in their companies. So we did that in the tax bill. And so I think obviously we're 1 year in, and then lots of other things like the affordable housing tax credit, child tax credit. We created that predictability and certainty. I would say one irritant that's still out there is tariffs, right? I feel that.
I was about to ask you about that.
Yeah, tariffs are still out there. Obviously, having a heavy ag district and a manufacturing district, I mean, I've seen the effect of tariffs. And I probably take a little bit different approach. I think tariffs ought to be used in a more strategic and tactical way to go after bad actors. I think predicating our economic policy on blanket tariffs doesn't necessarily work. And I think it's one of the things holding back on affordability. So we've done a good job on the predictability and certainty in the tax code. The tariff policy, I think, has been very inconsistent. It's been a lot of green light, red light inconsistencies. And I think a number of our manufacturers, depending on what industry you're in, have been affected by the tariffs and how to comply with those.
How do you balance your concerns about tariffs with your support for President Trump? Because it is such a big part of his economic agenda. And, even some Democrats I talk to will say to you off the record that they are impressed somewhat by what he's been able to accomplish with respect to trade deals, but they are worried about tariffs. I mean, how do you balance your concern with your support for the president?
Well, I'm going to speak up for my district. As a co-equal branch of government, we have an obligation and responsibility to speak up on behalf of the legislative branch, and I've done that on the Trade Subcommittee and the Ways and Means Committee. But I think we got to continue to have a more balanced approach on trade. I mean, I'm much more of a free trader. I understand what President Trump wants to do on Made in America and bringing back some of those jobs. I think it can be done in a much more nuanced way. And again, not kind of predicating our entire economic policy. If you go back and look at the Supreme Court decision on the IEEPA decision, Judge Gorsuch was very, very clear in there. If you want to do these things and predicate blanket tariffs on national security, you got to do that through the legislative process. So I think that falls in our lap to take more of a role when it comes to creating more markets and more customers around the globe. Look at the USMCA that we passed in 2018, the largest trade agreement. That's benefited all three countries, I think, immensely. I've seen that in my own district. I think looking at more trade agreements like that, I think will be beneficial to the country.
I wanted to ask you a little bit about some of the green shoots we're seeing in manufacturing. It's at the national level. We're seeing a ramp up in manufacturing activity. I wonder, are you seeing that in your district as well? I mean, it's kind of counterintuitive. You think the tariffs are hurting manufacturing, and I think they are, but we're seeing a little bit stronger manufacturing activity.
Definitely, and I think some of those policies have been beneficial to that. I'll give you an example. In Belvidere, Illinois, which is in Boone County in the northern part of my district, we have a plant there that's been shuttered for a number of years, owned by Stellantis. Stellantis has made a $600 million investment in that plant. The Department of Energy announced recently that they're going to have a grant for about $3 billion to get that plant up and running. That'll be about 3,000 workers that'll be building Jeep Cherokees and Jeep Compasses there in Belvidere. And so, I mean, I'm not sure that would have happened but for the policies of the Trump administration on bringing those jobs from other places back to the United States. I think that's a good example, and there are others where you're seeing this uptick in manufacturing, which I think is good for the American worker.
That brings me back to the housing question, which is all of this activity in your district is happening right now. We all know a house can't be built overnight. So, I mean, how do you struggle with the tension of all this economic activity coming at this moment, and some of the benefits of the legislation that you've supported may not play out for a little bit longer?
Yeah, it's taking a while to work through the machinations of the legislation, and obviously working with our local housing or our state housing development authorities. Like in Illinois, we work with the Illinois Housing Development Authority, great organization to work with. I think it's helpful and imperative to work with our local stakeholders on, again, implementation of the tax credit and some of these provisions. Obviously, the 21st Century Bill just got passed, but again, now we're creating that runway for more housing stock and getting a lot of this housing built now, and I think you'll start seeing that.
I feel like I can't let the co-chair of the Congressional Soccer Caucus off the stage without asking the big question. World Cup finally set.
Yeah.
Who is lifting the trophy?
Well, I think after yesterday's match, I think Argentina's probably a favorite on that. And yeah, I'm proud to be the co-chair of the Soccer Caucus, and I'm on the White House Task Force for the World Cup. And the Soccer Caucus was very involved on getting the bid for the World Cup back in 2018. And by any estimation, it's been a tremendous success. We've now played 102 of 104 matches. U.S. has been so welcoming, and it'll have a $30 billion impact in the United States. Some of you know this. First time the World Cup has expanded from 32 to 48 teams for this World Cup. First time it was hosted by 3 countries, Canada, Mexico, and the United States. I tell my colleagues we'll essentially have 104 Super Bowls in 39 days simultaneously, but it's been a huge success, and I think it's showcased America in a way that I don't think people expected, and the games have been tremendous from start to finish.
They really have. Last night was great.
Epic game.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Congressman LaHood,
Courtney,
for joining Axios. Appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. That was great.
Please welcome to the stage Axios DC reporter Mimi Montgomery.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Mimi Montgomery. I am one of the reporters at Axios DC and co-authors of the Axios DC newsletter, which you can sign up for at axios.com/newsletters. And I am lucky to be leading up our final conversation of the day, which tackles one of the biggest questions facing today's housing market. How do we expand the nation's housing supply to meet the growing demand? And here today to chat with me about this very important topic is the president of the National Multifamily Housing Council, Sharon Wilson Géno. Let's welcome Sharon. Thank you so much, Sharon, for being here with me today to chat.
Well, thank you for having me.
Yes. So obviously, the big news is that the 21st Century Road to Housing Act just became law. I know you have been chatting about this all week. And so the industry has applauded the bill overall, but I'm curious to hear what you think the biggest provisions are that will actually have the largest impact over the next 5 years, and how quickly can Americans who are struggling with housing costs actually expect to feel relief from this bill?
Well, thank you again for having me, and thanks to Citi for putting on this important conversation. The timing was really excellent given the passage of the bill. Frankly, I think the most important part of this bill right now is the fact that it is a down payment on more work that needs to be done. And we've now proven politically that housing is the number 1, 2, or 3 issue on the minds of voters, not just in this midterm election, but beyond. I think you heard from Congressman Pettersen. She gets it. You know, this is just the beginning. So you've seen bipartisan support, bicameral support, and a recognition that there are a lot of little things in this bill that will help housing moving forward. There's no one panacea. It's taken decades for us to get into the housing crisis that we're in today. It's going to take decades to get out, and there's no one magic bullet. And I think the fact that you've seen a number of things and people come together around a number of different tools tells you a lot about what's going to happen next. We're going to continue to need different tools, not just one big magic law that's going to make housing costs better for everyone.
Mm-hmm. And I want to get a little granular here in the National Multifamily Housing response to this bill. So you all spent months lobbying against the original piece of the bill that would have required that build-to-rent homes be sold within 7 years. And so Congress ultimately removed that language before the bill passed. And tell us a bit about why you were opposed to that provision and what it would have done in the market.
Yeah, and one of the fastest growing parts of multifamily development is this idea that people are living in rental housing longer and they want to make choices. We're looking at innovative opportunities to create different types of rental housing that meet the needs of people at different times in their lives. Build-to-rent housing is one of those components where people that are renters want to live in 4 freestanding walls and a patch of grass. It's for families that maybe are more mobile economically, and you heard Congressman LaHood talk about the importance of having ready housing supply in communities to create more economic development. Military families, very important for them because they're mobile. Also important for more mature families that want to downsize a little bit from their single family home, but they want a more fixed payment and they don't want the headache of maintenance and unexpected costs. So the idea that and it's financed like multifamily, it's horizontal multifamily housing, and it creates an important part of the supply. The idea that somehow these homes could be sold after 7 years to home buyers really belies the way they're financed, which they're financed to be rental communities, belies the way the infrastructure is set up and everything else. But what's really driving the bus, and it's a conversation we really need to have, and you heard again from Congressman LaHood as well as Congressman Pettersen, the only way we're going to get out of this situation is if we have public-private partnership with the public sector and the private sector coming together to finance the housing that we need. Housing costs money. And we need both sides of that. As Ed talked a little bit about, the low-income housing tax credit is one piece of a bigger puzzle. This idea that somehow what drove the train on the build-to-rent provision was this idea that, quote, institutional investment is the problem. Institutional investment is the answer. It is partnering with the government to bring private capital to the table so we can build the housing that we need.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And you're talking about, partnering with the government. Local governments tend to have a much bigger say over what gets built in communities than federal law often does. So I'm curious, how are you all working with state and local governments to turn this broader push for housing into actual changes on the ground?
Yeah, it's been a fascinating conversation because state and local governments are feeling this issue most acutely and have been for some time. They have been the innovators in this space, and Juliana and Ed talked a little bit about the importance of innovation. One of the things we've done, and we did this back in 2018, and we've just updated it. We've got some folks in the back that have a copy of it. We've created something called a Housing Affordability Toolkit. And it collects a lot of the best tools that are now available that we're seeing happening in different local communities and brings them all together. It's also an interactive tool. So you can get on our website and you can see what the housing challenges are in certain communities, and you can also see what some of the solutions have been used in other communities. And this is a vehicle for people to understand opportunities, and not everything works in every geography, but we have to start sharing those ideas, and the Affordability Toolkit is one vehicle for doing that.
Mm-hmm. And obviously you said earlier this bill is not a silver bullet, right? But it's largely being described as the biggest housing bill in decades. I want to hear from you though. Is there anything in the final legislation that you remain concerned about, or is there a larger issue that you think Congress left out? What is the biggest housing problem that you don't think it touched on or doesn't provide solutions for?
Oh, there are a lot of things it doesn't touch on. Step one is do no harm, and removing that prohibition on built-to-rent housing was one step in that direction, do no harm. What this bill does largely, it'll have a big impact perhaps on a deal here, a deal there in different subsegments of the market. Biggest change on the chassis requirement from manufactured housing, which we talked a little bit about. That's going to be huge for manufactured housing, but that's a subsegment of the market. I think I talked a little bit about the increase in the public welfare investment cap for banks, which frees up a little bit more opportunity for banks to be investors and partners in low-income housing tax credit and other affordable projects. That too, could have a big impact. But I think the next step is to create real incentives for people to take their dollars in the private sector and invest in partnership with local, state, and federal government to build the housing that we need. And that is the next step. And also, and something else, I think Julianne and Ed touched on in their conversation was we have to stop going back to the solutions of the past that no longer work. We're seeing a rise in sort of regulatory-based approaches like rent control and rent stabilization in communities across the country because people are desperate. I get the idea of it, but the two cities in the United States that have had the longest regulatory-based housing approaches have been New York and San Francisco. What are the two cities in the United States that have the most expensive rental housing with the least quality, with the least amount of supply and options? New York and San Francisco. So we have to kind of not keep going back to things that don't work and start looking at new things that do work in the new economy.
Speaking of looking at new things, we can move beyond the bill here, and I want to ask you, what innovation and technology is making it easier to build more multifamily housing faster today? And I've got to ask about, the big topic on everyone's mind right now, is AI playing a role in this at all?
AI has a huge opportunity to make housing better, stronger, faster, cheaper, more transparent, and to create more opportunities for people to access it faster. And I'll say responsible, we've had a lot of back and forth about how AI is used in pricing and in getting data. That's just data. In a competitive marketplace, and I have a 22 and a 24-year-old kids, they expect data to be readily available to them in any kind of decision that they make. So the more we're able to collect data and provide data to consumers, the better their opportunities are going to be to make the housing choices that work for them. AI is a really important tool in doing so. The other thing that's a really critical issue in the intersection of housing and technology is access to broadband. Not all multifamily communities have that access, and the federal government has stepped in a couple times trying to limit that access in multifamily housing and limiting the opportunity for multifamily housing providers to help their residents access broadband cheaper and more effectively. So it's being sure we have that environment where we can continue to innovate using technology, AI, broadband, and that we have the data privacy and security environment where residents and multifamily housing providers can feel confident that they are providing and using data in a way that makes sense and is compliant with applicable law.
And another big topic on everyone's minds these days, obviously, is climate, right? Climate change and environmental issues are increasingly playing a role in housing conversations and building costs, as I know you know. And so how do you balance building housing that's resilient enough for tomorrow's climate while also not pricing that housing out of reach today?
I wish I had the answer to that question. We'd be building some really great housing with me. It's a cost factor. And again, we are in an environment where costs of building are high. In some communities, the regulatory structure makes that higher because it takes longer, time is money, and it makes it more difficult to build housing more cost effectively like we'd like to. I think, but there's an opportunity here as well, as you mentioned, continuing to innovate and invest in technology that will bring that cost down and make housing materials much more resilient moving forward. Another area where there's already a lot of demonstrated success, but we'd like to continue to move that forward, is where broadband also intersects, is in managing utility costs. Systems that allow for remote monitoring of water usage, of electricity and other things are already showing promise in helping bringing the cost of housing down. But we have to bring the cost of the technology down in order to make it work in every community.
Mm-hmm. And you obviously in your role are in touch with some of the biggest industry leaders here in the country. And so when you talk to apartment owners and developers around the US right now, what is keeping them up at night? What are you hearing are their biggest pain points right now?
Many of them don't sleep. A lot of things. I think that if I had to package it into one concept, it's really this, the good news is we have everybody's attention around housing. So that should be a real positive. The bad news is we have everyone's attention around housing, and people are anxious to resolve what they see as an existential crisis, and frankly it is. But they're hitting some easy button policies of the past that aren't effective, that are just going to increase costs. So I think a lot of multifamily providers want to be that important private partner with governments in building the housing that we need today. So there's tremendous opportunity to do that and political will to do that. But on the other hand, if lawmakers are looking at just going to make that cost of building that housing and operating that housing higher, the numbers are not going to pencil. So it's really being able to tell that story of what really works and what doesn't work to ensure that they can produce the housing and produce it cost effectively in communities across the country.
Gotcha. I think we have time for one more question, so let's maybe leave this day on a nice note. Amid everything that we've talked about, cost, supply, politics, what makes you think that the housing picture 5 or 10 years from now could actually be better than it is today?
Again, I'm a little bit of a half glass full person, so I've been doing work in this space for 30 years. The fact that we do have everyone's attention is phenomenal. When I started working in this space a long time ago, we would knock on doors and say, I'm here for housing, and they would be like, housing is a local problem, or people just figure that out. I think there is recognition, and Congressman LaHood did such an excellent job of articulating this. Housing is critical to economic prosperity. Mm-hmm. And if we want to grow our economy and ensure that people really can achieve the American dream, which isn't how you live or whether you own your home or rent your home, it's do you have the economic security to make the choices to live the life you want to live? That is the American dream fundamentally. And housing is a critical part of it, and that recognition those things have to go together, I think gives me hope that we will continue to implement more positive housing policy in the future, and that we can, we're Americans, hey, we've solved tough problems before, we can solve this one too, we just have to be thoughtful about it.
That's a hopeful note to end this, I think. Thank you so much, Sharon, for taking the time to chat with me this morning. I really appreciate it. And thank you to all of you for joining us this morning, and thank you so much to our partner this morning, Citi. Be sure to follow all of today's coverage on Axios.com, and to learn more about any upcoming events that we're hosting, you can check us out at Axios.com/events. And there are light refreshments in the back for you all to enjoy. And thank you again so much for being here, and we really hope to see you at the next event.
Thank you.